I want to take a time to just introduce today's sermon. We are in this series called What Matters, and we're saying over and over again that it would be wise for us to have what matters to us align with what matters to God. Well, one of the things that we know that matters to us is our money, our wealth, and our time. Next Sunday is Thanksgiving Sunday. We've done this for several years. And during Thanksgiving Sunday and worship next week, we will be invited to fill out a plan for giving card for 2020. That is what we plan to put in the offering plate each week during 2020. Okay. Now, so if you are a member of this church, you probably got a mailing about this yesterday, or you'll get it early this week. And if you want to see what the card looks like, you can pick this up on the way out. It's at the information center. It's a copy of what it looks like. And on the back is a little statement as to our current status financially, a little financial report. Some people like to know that as they prepare for this. But here's what I'm asking you to do and inviting you to do. And that is this week, in prayer and in conversation with the people in your household, to ask the Lord this question: what percentage of my income are you calling me to give to further your mission through the ministry of St. Luke Lutheran Church in 2020? And just kind of listen for God to give you that number. What's the percentage? And then you can work out what that means in dollar amount. And so when you come next Sunday, you'll be ready to fill this out. And then what will happen is we'll have this time of prayer and filling out the plan for giving cards. And then as an act of worship, you'll be invited to come forward and place it on the altar as a way of worshiping and thanking God. So I want to give you that heads up so you're prepared for that this week. But what we decided to do, in order to kind of prepare our hearts for this step, which is what is most important, we decided to welcome back our good friend David Drees to hear how the Lord might speak to us through him as we prepare for this. So let's welcome up David.
Am I correct that this is like being streamed? Is that what's happening? Yes. So there's millions of people watching right now. Okay, so for those of you who don't know me, my name's David. My wife and I moved to Salt Lake about 3.5 years ago, and before that, I used to come here every 6 or 7 weeks and kind of get to teach. And is this on? I don't even know. Hello? Hello? Yeah. Cool. And so it's been a blessing to come back. Steve texted me a few months ago and was like, "Hey, are you going to be here the week before Thanksgiving?" And I said, "No, we're not coming back to Ohio before Christmas." And so I said, "Sorry, I can't help you out." And then I went online and I saw that there were really cheap flights, and my son is still under 2 until January, and so he's free. And so I said, now is the time, because I don't want to do it in January. So we hopped on a plane. I said, "I'm here this week." And he was like, "Great, would you teach on asking people to give money?" And I was like, "Oh, that sounds like a lot of fun." But it's like kind of my wheelhouse. When we moved to Salt Lake 8 months in, our pastor was like, "Hey, would you ever want to teach?" And I was like, "Sure, I'd love to." And he was like, "How about in 2 months you teach the college kids about purity?" And I was like, I don't want to do that at all. So I'm getting these softballs from Steve. So, but I'm excited to be here, and I get to talk about something I think is really cool. So I want to just level set in a second, but I'll tell you this story. Morgan, my wife, and I, some of our best friends bought the house next door to us, which is awesome. And they love Jesus, and it's so fun. And they came to us one day, and they said, "Hey, we are teaching the discipleship school at church, which is every Monday and Wednesday night from 7 to 10-ish, and we teach people that want to sign up for a full year. Hey, let's really dive in. Let's learn what it's like to follow Jesus." And I'm like, "That's awesome." And I'm like, "Could you watch Jane?" She's 1.5. "Could you watch Jane? School starts at 7. She goes to sleep at 7:15. So if you just put her down after like 10 minutes at your house, we'll come get her sometime between 10 and 11 every Monday, Wednesday." And we're like, "Yeah, that's easy. We'll play with her for 10 minutes, put her to sleep, no big deal." And so the week rolls around, and they text us like, "Hey, we're bringing Jane over." And I was like, "That's cool, but it's only 5:30. And they're like, "Well, the school starts at 7, but we are teachers, so we have to get there early to set up, and we have a staff meeting." And I was like, "Yeah, but it's not like what we talked about." So I don't know if I want to do that. And so they're like, okay, we'll bring her over. And I was like, great. And so then we have Jane, who's 1.5, and then Oliver, my son, who's almost 2. And some of you have like multiple kids. You're like, what's the big deal? I'm like, I'm telling you, it's a big deal for me, okay? I don't have that. So I was like, this is a lot of children. And I have Morgan, so I'm like, we got it. We'll just play man-to-man. It's fine. And then Morgan was like, hey, just want to remind you, David, that every other Monday I have such and such, so I won't be here on Mondays. And I was like, oh, so it's just me and these children now. And I was like, okay, I got this. And I realized I don't have this when it was time for their baths, and it's 6 o'clock, and they're both in the bath. And I'm like, well, how do I get one out and dry them off in the other room? How do I do that? I can't leave the other one in the bathtub. I think that's bad parenting. So I just picked these 2 naked kids up, and I'm walking through the house, and I'm like, I don't have any towels out. I didn't think through this at all. So I just lay them down in our bed, and I like take the comforter, and I'm like, and then I'm like, I don't have any diapers. You know, so I'm just like walking them through the house naked, and I'm slowly, I finally get them to sleep. I got one downstairs. I'm trying to put her to sleep, so I have Oliver like locked in the family room, and I'm like, that's safe, you know. And I'm putting Jane to sleep, and then I'm like running down the hall to make sure Ollie's okay. And finally, it works. It happened. I successfully did it, and I was like, that I don't ever want to do that again. But that happens every month now. The one time when Morgan's gone, and I started getting a little bitter because I'm like, we did not sign up for this. This is not what I agreed to. And then a few weeks ago, our friends, I didn't tell you this part. Our friends, they have a 3-month-old, and they were like, we are dying. Like, we need a break. It's Sarah's birthday. We got a hotel up in Park City for the night. Could you watch Ezra for the night? And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. But I don't know how to say no. So I was like, yeah, absolutely. We'd love to do that. And so they're like, here's Ezra. And Morgan's like, just a side note, I am gone again. This is the Monday I'm gone. And I'm like, I have 3 children under 2, and it's just me. Then I'm like, this is the bad. So at one point I was driving down the road. I had 3 car seats in the back, which I'm not even sure that's safe. And I was like, I don't even know where to go. I was just driving around the city because I didn't want to let them out, you know. And I finally got them all to sleep. And I was just like, at this point I hit like max bitterness. And I was like, and I love these people. They're like some of our best friends. And I literally was like, Morgan, we did not sign up for this. They are taking advantage of us. I'm frustrated. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And I finally had to sit down and be like, hey, I don't know what's wrong with them. I'm so frustrated. This was supposed to be something that blessed them and blessed our church, and then now I'm just annoyed. And I had to reframe kind of the lens I was seeing it through. Like, why did we agree to do this? And what's the heart? What are we freeing them up to do? And what is the impact of what we're freeing them up to do having on our church and on people's lives? And it really just took a refreshing of our mind to be like, okay, this is the heart behind why we said yes. And so now it's fine. It's kind of fun. It's like this is a circus. Like when I'm by myself, it's like we should probably put it on HGTV. People will enjoy it. But it's okay. But it took me reframing kind of the mindset that I was seeing it through. And so that's what I want to do before we get started. In Romans 12, verses 1 and 2, Paul is kind of reframing everything. He says, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice. So he's saying, I want you to give everything you've got as a living sacrifice, but I'm asking you to do it in view of God's mercy. And so a small refresher on what God's mercy actually is. God's mercy, if you read in Ephesians chapter 2, it says, you and I are dead in our transgressions. We're at the bottom of the ocean dead. We're not drowning. We're not struggling. We're dead in our transgressions. But God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive in Christ and seated us with him in the heavenly realm. So he's rich in mercy. He didn't just raise us from the bottom of the ocean and make us alive again. He then seats us in the heavenly realms with him. So he then raises us to be equal with him. Like, it's an amazing amount of stuff that he did there. It's an incredible amount of grace and mercy in that act right there, that redemption, that justification of us. And so Paul is saying, in view of that, offer your body as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship. But then he says, do not conform to the patterns of this world anymore, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is for you, his good, pleasing, and perfect will. He's saying, because renew your minds, and then you're going to be able to figure out, what does God want me to do? What is he actually asking me to do? And so I'm asking, before we dive in, and before you spend this next week, you've been given a gift this week, and I'll explain why. And before we go there, to reframe our thoughts to see things through the lens of God's mercy. This, we didn't deserve it. We lost it all. He had it all. He gave it all, so we get it all. Like this kind of ridiculousness. And so we're going to talk about just a heart of generosity. And I think sometimes we can just be like, well, I give because I'm supposed to. I give because it's the right thing to do, like for the kids. It's this mentality of like, that's just what we do. Or we got to keep the lights on, so of course we have to help pay. We can't just come here and consume. And all those things are true, but they're not the best. Right? They're not coming from the best place. It says in Corinthians that things are permissible, but they're not always beneficial. So things are okay sometimes. It's okay to do X sometimes, but it doesn't mean it's the best. And I think there's a really good example of that in Genesis chapter 4. It's the story of Cain and Abel. And I won't read the whole thing, but here's what happens. Adam and Eve give birth to two sons, Cain and Abel. And Cain is a farmer, and Abel is like a rancher. And they come to give a sacrifice to the Lord, to be like, thank you, Lord, we love you. Thank you for loving us. Here's a sacrifice for the sins we've committed. Then Cain comes, and it says this. In course of time, Cain brought some of the fruits of the soil as an offering to the Lord. So Cain shows up, and he's like, here's some carrots and some apples and veggies for you, man. And then it says, but Abel also brought an offering, fat portions from some of the firstborn of his flock. And so Abel, his brother, shows up, and he's like, God, thank you so much. Here is the best piece of meat from the best animal from my flock. Here, it's for you. And God looks at Abel's giving, and he's like, I love that. I love the quality of the gift. I love that you gave me the best of the best. And he looks at Cain, and he's like, you gave me a gift. And Cain's like, are you kidding me? What in the world? And I think sometimes we're like conditioned to think that Cain showed up with like a bunch of moldy tomatoes and was like, I don't need these anymore. You can have them, God. But it doesn't say that in the text, so we can't make that assumption. What we can assume from the text is that Cain showed up and was like, here's some fruit and veggies. And Abel showed up and was like, here's the best piece of meat from the best animal in my flock for you, Lord. And God looks at him and he goes, I love this because I love your heart. You gave me the best of the best. And he looks at Cain and he's like, you just gave me some food. And Cain's like really frustrated. And God's like, and I love that God asks rhetorical questions. He's like, why are you mad, Cain? He says, why are you angry? Why is your face downcast? If you do what is right, will you not be accepted? If you do not do what is right, sin is crouching at the door. It desires to have you, but you must rule over. So he's basically like, Cain, why are you mad? Because if you do what you're supposed to do, if you give the Lord your best, everything's going to be fine. And Cain knows, like, I didn't give you my best. I may have given you something. It may be permissible, but it's not beneficial. And so God's not sitting there going, you didn't give enough, or you didn't give it the right way. He's saying, you didn't trust me with the best stuff. You didn't look at me like I'm God and I deserve the best. You just gave. And so one, I think we need to ask the question, what's the quality of stuff that I am giving? We'll get into that a little bit later. And it's not saying God's like, give me all your gold. Let's go. Let me have the rings. It's the heart behind it. And we get to see that heart fleshed out in 2 Corinthians. Last week, Mike used 2 Corinthians 8, 1 through 7. And a refresher is, in 1 through 7, Paul is talking to the Corinthians about the Macedonians. And he's like, let me just tell you about these guys. They don't have a lot of money. But they got so overwhelmed by this desire to give that they gave in abundance. They got so excited about giving that they gave, even when it was kind of reckless for them to give. Like they probably shouldn't give that much money. They're pretty poor. But they were just so excited. And Paul's like, I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty. I'm telling you this so you can see the heart of what a giver is supposed to look like. Someone who is so infatuated with the idea of giving that they give. Not because they have to, because they feel obligated to, or because it's the right thing to do. It's just because they are so overwhelmed by it. And he goes, but if you think that's a good example of the heart, let me give you the best. And this is what he says in verse 9. For you know the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, that though he was rich, yet for your sake he became poor, so that through his poverty might become rich. So Paul's like, let me give you a better example of the heart of giving. Jesus. Jesus is God. He has everything. And so that you and I could understand the greatest gift and the heart of the greatest giver, he decides to put off his royalty, put off his Godhead, come down, live a life with us, and even more, die for us. Now it says it it says it in Philippians chapter 2, verses 6 through 10, that God considered equality something that couldn't be grasped. So he basically says, the people down there can't understand what it's like to be me. They just can't grasp what it would be like to be equal with me, to have the heart that I have. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to send my son, and he's going to become nothing. He's going to humble himself, and then he's going to humble himself to death. Even death on a cross, because so that you can understand the heart that I have for you and for giving and for my people, I'm going to send Jesus down there, and he's going to humble himself to be one of you, and he's going to humble himself to die for you, and it's going to be an incredibly humbling death too. Because I really do believe if Jesus wanted to, if he wanted the story to be like this, he could have died at age 95 in a bed surrounded by his loved ones for the sins of the world. But instead, he chose to be broken in half in his prime on display as a spectacle for everyone to show the full extent of his love. He was like, I want you to see my heart on full display in this way. And so God was like, I want you to know the heart behind giving, the heart behind generosity, and that is a heart for my people. And so Paul's like, look at the Macedonians, amazing. But if you really want the real story, look at Jesus. That's the heart that drives us. Like it says it in 2 Corinthians 5. This is such a cool verse. 2 Corinthians 5, verses 14, it says, for Christ's love compels us. Because, there's a because, we are convinced that one died for all and therefore all died. So basically what Paul is saying in 2 Corinthians 5 is saying, Christ's love compels us to give, not because we realize that the lights need to be on. Christ's love compels us to give. It compels us to pray. It compels us to sacrifice. It compels us to preach. It compels us to love because we are so overwhelmingly convinced that the gospel is real, that the gospel is transformative, that the gospel not just makes you a better person, but it takes you dead from the bottom of the ocean and it raises you to new life with him so that you get to understand what equality with God actually is. And so that people that don't know Jesus have the ability to hear something and to pursue something that will do that for them. And so he's saying Christ's love is the catalyst. It's the reason that we are compelled to be generous. It's not out of obligation or understanding or just logic. It's because I'm so overwhelmed by what it can do that I want to give. And I think sometimes we hear this and we're like, okay, I get it. Give me some money. I get it. But that's not what we're talking about here. Like there is a piece where it's like, hey, some of you have the incredible ability to give a lot of money. Some of us do not. But there's also the ability to give your time. Some of you, because of what stage in life you're in, have an incredible amount of time that you can give to the people of God, to the church, to the ministry, to the mission of St. Luke's. Some of you don't have a lot of time. Some of you, an hour is super precious, and so that hour is what you're going to give, and that's a huge sacrifice, and that's okay. And some of you have incredible gifts to give to the church. Like some of you are super musical like Aaron, and you should be up here and you should be blessing people with the sound of your voice. Some of you, like me, should not be blessed people with the sound of your voice. Like it would be a disservice to you. Some of you are incredibly creative. And so when Steve and them are like, hey, we need someone to decorate this church so that it honors the God who we love and it makes everyone just in awe of what Christmas is. Like some of you don't have that gift. Like I would put up crepe paper and be like, Christmas. You know, like it's just wouldn't be good. And some of you are so gregarious or extroverted or friendly, or you're so easily forming relationships that you should be at the door greeting people when they walk in. How many of you came in here for the first time at some point? Some of you were just born in here. If you were born in here, turn your ears up. Everyone at some point came through the doors and either felt loved and valued and known and a part of this place, or they didn't. And I bet you those people aren't here. Like I can tell you, there's a couple churches that we went into. There's one in Columbus. Morgan and I, out of college, were trying to find a church for ourselves. We walked in. It almost felt like people were in huddles. Like no one talked to us. We went to the whole service, not a single person. We walked out. No one said anything. And I was like, let's never go to that place ever again. And we never did. And then we moved to Salt Lake. And 3 days in, we stumbled into this church called Antioch. And within 10 minutes, I was like, we're never leaving here. Like people were like, do you want to get dinner tomorrow? I'm like, okay, great. And Morgan's like, quit saying yes to everything. But we felt so loved because there are people that had the gift of hospitality and friendship, and they were leveraging that talent. And some of you have the gift of creativity and singing, and some of you have the gift of finance, and some of you, like you need to leverage those skills. And so I'm going to tell you one more thing, and then I can tell you about the gift that you've been given. You're like, is it really a gift? It is. There's a book in the Bible called Nehemiah. And for those of you who don't know, I'll give you a little crash course. Nehemiah is a book all about rebuilding the wall around Jerusalem. The exiles, the God's people had been exiled for 70 years. And the book of Ezra is about them coming back and kind of rebuilding the temple. And then Nehemiah is like, I love that. I love my town. I love my temple. But the wall around Jerusalem is destroyed. And if a new king shows up, not one that's like our friend, but a new one that hates us, easily taking us back into exile, easily conquering and destroying the temple. And I don't want that to happen. So he goes to the king, which you shouldn't do, and he says, I would like you to send me back to my hometown to rebuild the temple wall. And he's like, okay. And he's like, also, I'd need a lot of money and supplies. And the king is like, okay. And so Nehemiah gets to go back, and he gets to start rebuilding the wall. And you get to chapter 3. And chapter 3 is either the most amazing chapter, or it is like easily skipped. Because chapter 3 basically says, and then the Brown family rebuilt this piece of the wall, and the Drees family rebuilt this piece of the wall, and the Jones family rebuilt this, and this had the gate here, and they rebuilt the gate, and blah, 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 blah. And you could literally be reading like, okay, pass, next one, I get it, they're all building the wall. But what you need to see is that some people were given a section of the wall that was literally just their backyard, and some people were given a section of the wall that included the gates. Like, that's really important, because people, they need to come and go, but they need to be fortified. And some people may have been given a really long portion of the wall, but it's kind of out in a hard-to-reach area, so it's not that important, but it's really long. It's a lot of work. And so what I love about the story is it's like, but here's the reality of a wall. It's only as strong as its weakest point. And so everyone and every brick mattered. And everything that was given and all the effort given and the money and the supplies and all that stuff given was done to strengthen the temple and God's people. And so some of you can give a lot, some of you can give a little, some of you have great talents that should be used, some of you maybe don't know your talents and you need to draw those out, some of you have incredible amounts of time, some don't. But the idea here is that everything matters. And so you've been given this week, because next week Steve is going to ask you to make a commitment. You've been given a week to figure out, what do we want to give? But before you sit down and go, what do we want to give? I hope that the reset is, Lord, help me first get a lens of your mercy so that everything we're talking about, everything we're thinking through, and everything we're giving is through that. That it's not out of a sense of obligation or need. Because again, God will use that, and it's fine, but it's not the best. And if you keep reading in Corinthians chapter 9, it says, like, you give what you feel like you're supposed to give. Like, at the end of the day, you do you. Because God is pleased with that. But to get to that point, you have to do it through a lens and through a compulsion of, because I so believe the gospel, I am excited to do and give X, Y, and Z. And so what I would love for you to do this week is, one, once you get to that place, sit down and do a budget of your money. And this isn't like, okay, here's what's left over, let's give that. Like, you remember what Abel did, he gave his first fruits. So say, here's what we feel compelled to give. And then what's left, and be like, all right, we'll figure out life with the rest of it. And then do a budget for time. Because I think a lot of us are like, I don't have any time. And then when we go through our days and we find out how much time we actually do have, like, I guess if I didn't watch 3 hours of Netflix, I would have more time. But gosh, that show's so good. But we do a budget of our time, figure out where we're at. And like, I would look at mine and be like, I don't know when I would do this. I have to get up earlier, I guess. But maybe I want to do that. Maybe I feel compelled to do that. So go through a budget of your time. And then this one's hard, but I think this could be the coolest one, is what are your talents? Sometimes it's hard to be like, this is what I'm good at. But sit down with someone who loves you and knows you and is so for you and say, how could I leverage myself for the kingdom? And let them speak over and say, you are so good at X. You would be so good at Y. I think you need to fill in here. I think you should say yes to this. I think you actually should say no to this and say yes to this. Like, have someone that loves you and knows you and is also seeing through the lens of God's mercy speak into what are the talents that you can give. And I'm saying this, I haven't asked Steve or Mike this, but I think they would agree with this. We here at St. Luke's need this. We're asking you to be a part of what's going on here in the ministry here. But this doesn't just expound only to the St. Luke's ministry. Like, if you feel like you need to give time or money or talents anywhere for the kingdom, that's the compulsion of your heart. Go for it. But you've been given a week to enjoy this, to figure out, where is God doing? What is he doing? What is he asking from us? And so I just pray that you would enjoy that and engage with that. So I'm going to pray for us, and we'll keep going. God, thank you so much for your son. Thank you that it is the most incredible picture of generosity and sacrifice. I pray that would be what compels us as we think through this, but really would just compel us to pursue you, that we would pursue you out of a overwhelmingness for how much you love us. And so I thank you for these people, and thank you for this church. And I pray that we would get to see all the things that you are doing with all the time and the talent and the treasures that are being given. In your name, amen.